Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and you're listening to my non-tech podcast. So this is generally where I will talk about economics or health or just or culture or anything that just kind of is outside the realms of tech. Again, this could be one of many different podcasts you're probably subscribed to. Again, I'm just kind of consolidating my podcast presence. So you're either listening to my tech podcast or you're listening to my non-tech podcast, depending on which feeds you've subscribed to over the years. And there's going to be a touch of tech here, but basically what I want to do is kind of just think about sort of like the world of communication and the world of communication in a better world and in the era of AI. Okay, because one thing I've been doing a lot, if you listen to my tech podcast, I've been talking a lot about AI and sort of the effect that it's having on things like software development and things like that. But as we use AI more, so it's less about like learning, like, let's say, a programming language or whatnot. Like, the barriers to doing things are becoming less and less and less. Okay, so when you think about it now, like, I mean, if you start really kind of putting it all together, you have 3D printers that can just build stuff based on design. You have AI, so you can imagine a world where now in the future you can ask for a thing, just like literally anything in the world. The AI can generate the blueprints, and the 3D printer can print it. We're really not too far off from a Jetsons world. And some of that I'm sure is probably already a thing. Okay, and then and I mean, there's food 3D printers, and like, technology is pretty cool. But a lot of this now comes down to sort of how we interact with AI, how we interact with how we engage with artificial intelligence, and this comes down to a lot of like how effective you are with AI is very much how has to do with how good you are at communicating. So, communicating, which seemed like it was becoming sort of like less of a want. I mean, to me, communication is always important, but I think there was a time where, with more and more automation, people were thinking that, and then you see like the evolution of sort of like what's happened with newspapers, things like that. Like, people were kind of getting pessimistic about sort of like the role of communication, especially when you see sort of like the divides in society and a lot of the political stuff that's going on. But it's, to me, this is like, I'm always, anyone who knows me knows I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist, and I'm an individualist. I believe all people have a value, and we should all make an effort to see that individual value in each other, and give each other that space to maximize the value we have as an individual, not just, again, economically, but just in enriching each other's lives. Not that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't people who destroy value in the way they live their lives, whether they hurt others, they take from others. But I do believe most people, and I do believe all people, have a capacity of giving value, whether it's just being a great companion, a great contributor, whether it's to the economic or cultural value of the world. So in that case, I am very high on the protection of sort of individual autonomy. For those who sort of just don't know me as well and don't know my whole vibe. But with that, the reason I've always been really big on the role of communication, particularly in just how making individualism more of a practicality. And again, to me, when communication breaks down and people have a more difficult time communicating, that's where it becomes harder to be sort of an individualist, because people have a harder time kind of appreciating nuance and interacting with people who are subtly diverse, and then even more than subtly diverse. So in a world where basically, to survive, you need to embrace sort of this AI future, which means you have to learn how to communicate with the AI effectively, which generally means good communication in general. To me, that does breed a world where basically, after some friction, okay, because again, anytime you have a change like this, not everyone's going to be able to adapt effectively, and that causes tension. So you're going to have those people who can adapt, who are going to adjust to this world really fine. And then you're going to have those people who don't adapt for a variety of different reasons. It's not necessarily because they can't. There's cultural reasons, like they either don't want to for different cultural reasons, or they don't want to. There's a variety of different reasons. Okay? But they don't adapt. And then they find themselves sort of isolated, left behind, and then they're going to get angry, and this causes sort of a lot of the kind of resentment and anger, and even hate and violence that you see today. People who are feeling like they are left behind, they're not quite sure why, and they find X reason to blame it. Whether it's blaming X or Y group. Okay, and everyone has their favorite. Reminds me of this episode. This is a great TV show I used to love, The Uprisings Brigade, that had an episode where a character was being like sort of like giving violent threats at work, so they sent him to like the company psychologist. And like in the company psychologist said that the basic diagnosis that he had like all this sort of like unrestrained sort of anger and hate. So what he needed to do was just choose a person to put that into. So then they gave him like this catalog of like different people, like, oh, like there's these Lapland mountain dwellers. How about them? Basically choose sort of somewhere to channel that energy into. And again, like most comedy, it's funny because there's an element of truth to it, in the sense that like people have a tendency of getting frustrated, angry, whatnot, and then they just choose somewhere to channel it, whether it's justified or not. And we're seeing a lot of that today, mainly because we are in this transition period. But again, once we're on the other side of it, which will probably be after I'm long gone, because it takes like a generation or two, because you need a couple generations to kind of grow up in that new normal. You need that sort of churn, that churn. You're gonna have a generation that grew up just knowing that, hey, talking to AI and learning how to communicate is just table stakes, and they're gonna be able to. But it's not just to communicate with AI, but they're gonna know how to communicate with each other better. They're gonna be better at looking for information. Now again, I know what the pessimistic side of this is. What happens if people manipulate the AI to give bad information and whatnot. But again, people have these kind of fears when like TV first, like, hey, what happens if someone puts something bad on TV, and then when the internet first came out, and people kind of adjusted. Like if you take a look at younger people using the internet, they're going to be much better at sort of filtering nonsense than people who because they grew up with it, than people who did not grow up with it. And same thing with like TV beforehand and radio before that. As you get new forms of communication, there's going to be people who abuse it, but people are going to grow up with it, and sort of those abuses become something that people are aware of and understand and know is a thing. Like, for example, your emails. I'm sure you get lots of spam emails, but over time, most people, probably people listening to this podcast, are going to be people who've kind of learned to kind of know, hey, this is an email I should trust versus an email I should not trust. And again, doesn't necessarily mean everyone does it perfectly, but the idea is that we over time we adapt. There'll be those who adapt, and then those who don't. And then that's where the fiction comes in. But over time, more people adapt than not, as you have sort of that generational churn. And again, a generation of people who communicate better, because communication becomes the way you do everything. It's less about like you'll still need physical skills, but more and more of everything. I mean, like imagine later on when you have like robot plumbers. The robot plumber is going to be just as effective as your ability to describe your problem to them. Everyone's going to become really good at being able to articulate problems and think and breaking down problems, because that's going to be the main skill. That's going to be the table stakes skill, not even a skill. It's going to be just sort of a mandatory thing you need to be able to do. And to me, that will lead to a world of more peace, of more kindness, because we'll be able to do, not necessarily all be nice to each other, but we'll be able to resolve conflict better because we can communicate better. Now, on the other, again, playing both sides, when people have more instant gratification, their patience becomes less. So you're also going to have a world of less patience in certain ways. But I do think also you'll have, again, people being more apt and able to communicate grievances and discuss grievances, and hopefully better at compromising. That one I'm still not sure on when I try to play it out of my head. Because AI, to an extent, sort of gives you a room to not compromise in a lot of ways. You can just kind of get what you want when you want it. But I can imagine people, that'll just become something that's just like a nuance of sort of human interaction. And then again, people just have greater spaces in themselves, in the sense that, like, hey, with things like video games, with AI, like people feel like this breaks people apart, but at the same time, it also gives people space sort of escape when they need to, in the same way people would escape in a book or escape in a game that they would play with their friends even before books. The idea is that, people have a space, or, just being lost in your own imagination. Sometimes people need a space to just not be part of everything else. And now you have much more options for that. And I do think that's also like very good for, diffusing conflict and things like that. So, yeah, this was my thoughts. Again, there's a lot of negative things in the world too. So, like I am an economics buff. So of course I'm concerned about things like tariffs and the political state of things and whatnot. At the end of the day, like, everything is a byproduct of what came right before it. So everything is a byproduct of sort of this transition period we're going in, which is causing all sorts of, again, conflict. And basically, we're living in a world where basically people are being asked to adapt at a rate faster than ever before, and that pace is not changing. If anything, it's only accelerating, and that is going to create a much bigger gap between those who adapt and don't adapt than before. But at the same time, there's a lot of reasons. If you take a look at like the big picture, we need to kind of accelerate the rate that we grow. When you think, whatever you think, sort of like the large technological or global headwinds for humanity are down the road, generally whatever big problem is the problem that keeps you up at night, solving that problem is going to involve technological innovation, and it's going to need us to innovate faster than we've been innovating. So the fact that things are starting to really pick up speed, bodes well for the perpetual existence of humanity. Whether, again, I can think of whatever sort of person you are. I can think of, hey, there's this thing that you are like, oh, this is going to happen to the world. And technological innovation will generally make a lot of those things less of an issue. But at the same time, advancing technology is also going to change the way sort of demands for labor, the way we live our lives, and that's going to create friction. But eventually, there will be a plateau at some point, or there'll be some sort of shift, and I'm generally feeling pretty optimistic about that shift. So take that for where you are. Again, happy 2026. Hopefully you all had a good 2025. I know that people either had a really good one or a really bad one. The last few years have been really good to me, but yeah. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I'll see you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.